Up this hour is one of the most extraordinary people on radio. I get comments all the time about Bill. He is Dr. Bill Deagle, of course, a master of so many different disciplines and so many topics. I just simply title his visits Multiple Updates, because that's what we try to do. But we're going to talk this hour before we get to Jordan next hour, so the next 2 hours are really powerful, all about Fukushima and what's going on there. And what's going on there is the actual plant itself, the reactor buildings, are basically disintegrating at the nuclear level. This is very interesting. And Bill, welcome back.
Welcome back. I want to get into some basic physics because I know there's a little twist in the information that people should have, so they go back to references, or if they have any physics training, they'll understand there's three types of energy being released at the plant, primarily, or actually four. There's beta particles, which are high-speed electrons, and they can be stopped pretty easily by something relatively simple, as an easy object. Alpha particles are stopped by something as easy as a piece of paper. Electrons will go a little deeper, maybe skin deep. The gamma rays can go very deep, can go 6 to 8 feet into the ground in regular ground, or go about through a 1.5 feet of concrete. The best thing to block it, actually, believe it or not, is depleted uranium. So if you had containers and you line up a bunch of them and welded them together and lined them with DU, you could actually have a walk path for workers to get in and out and do things. So you could literally create a depleted uranium kind of a, if you want to call it, tunnels around the actual site if they want to do something. We don't see them doing anything that even makes sense. It's like, you remember the silent movies of Keystone Cops. This should be called the Japanese version around TEPCO of the Keystone Cops. Now, what's happening is, and because I went back and did quite a bit of research today to find out, because there was a report out by Alexander Higgins talking about the reports from the Fukushima diary about the release of radioiodine. And I went back and checked the dates. And on April around the 14th, around the 22nd, it was a fairly high level of radioiodine at 220 on their scale that dropped around the 28th, around 28, and then dropped around 19. So the report that it was supposedly a release last Wednesday was the release of the information, not the radioiodine. And that we can't tell which site it came from, which building. It could come from building 1, 2, 3, or the underground corium had a massive burp. And of course, you're not going to hear it unless there's a hydrogen explosion. That burp could be under the ocean, and that burp could literally come up and then bubble up to the surface, where 80% of the radiation is probably going. But what's happening in cooling pool 4 is a couple of things. Firstly, the chances of a zirconite fire, considering how hot it is not likely, but it could happen. What's likely to happen, however, is that there's a thing called criticality occurring, and that means it creates fast neutrons. And the neutrons, when they hit the material, whether it's steel or concrete, they change the atomic structure. Now, gamma rays don't do that. They kill microchips. So a microchip of a regular conventional robot coming to the area, or electrical circuits, gets fried. But materials get destroyed by neutrons. When you hit something with a neutron, you get neutron annealing, it's called. You can look this up, neutron annealing. It changes the atomic structure because metal is actually a paracrystalline solid. By paracrystalline, it literally, when you make metal, especially when you make metal like the folded sword of a samurai, which is folded thousands of times, like it folds and folds and folds, you actually have multi-layers, and all the electrons actually flow along those layers,
right.
Atomic layers. So that's what makes it so strong, and why it also is so sharp, is because it's not only sharp because of its physical structure as a parallel paracrystalline solid, but it also has layers of electrons and protons. And when you put in certain neutrons into any material, you transmute it. Okay, you transmute it. When you change the atomic structure of some materials like concrete, steel, whatever, you transmute those materials, and they start to become, like I call, the flaky pie crust syndrome, where basically now all of a sudden you have no longer baked nice. You haven't been baking very good pie crust, but now all of a sudden you have mastered flakiness. Now, TEPCO has mastered the flakiness of the steel and the integral structure and the stress ability to tolerate stress like an earthquake of the entire site. And as these neutrons keep on zipping around there, and the example that you can tell is that, and people can't fly there, but there are pictures early on where you could see neutron beams coming off, and as it hits the nitrogen emits blue light. So you'll see these blue lights that come off around TEPCO. They go 8, 10, 20 miles until it gets up into the upper atmosphere, and then they kind of disappear. Those neutron beams literally keep going on forever, thousands of miles into space. And when they hit nitrogen down lower in the Earth, you can actually see, especially at dusk, that there's criticality occurring all over the planet. Now, what's likely to happen if there isn't a cladding fire, which means that there's been releases of radioiodine, that's going to fall over, and there's a massive amount of radioisotopes there. Now, what's dangerous about this is that cooling pool 4 is not a MOX reactor, but it means most of this fuel, which is for years and over, literally packed to the ceiling, it's open fuel. It's not like Chernobyl. It's inside a containment structure. So it makes trying to treat or service any other area of the building virtually impossible. So what's likely to happen is the annealing of the building. They've said already that a level 6 earthquake is likely to knock it over, which means in the next probably 2 months, the building's going to fall over from a level 6 earthquake, say 2 to 6 months, just to put a approximate. It's not years, it's months. And when that happens, no one around the site, even if they're suicidal, can even get near the area to do anything. Put a tent around it, do anything. And the area that's really dangerous is not so much reactor cooling pool 4, which makes it impossible to service the area because that's going to eventually get into the groundwater, create what's called by neutron insertion, turns water into tritium and deuterium. And that slows down neutrons. Now, when this corium gets down there like a lava lamp and it starts to agglomerate and go along rock interfaces and maybe collect, it eventually reaches what's called supercriticality, where now you not only are generating hydrogen for the zirconium cladding, which can trigger a hydrogen explosion, similar to the kind of explosions you have around plastique of the old-style atomic nuclear bombs. And when that happens, the hydrogen explosion, combined with these slow neutrons created by more and more tritium and higher concentrations of heavy water. And this is how the nuclear reactors work in Canada. They're called CANDU, which basically they take regular non-weapons grade uranium, low-grade uranium, and they put a giant, if you want to call it, circulating area around it of slow neutrons with heavy water. And once they regulate the amount of concentration of heavy water to determine how hot the reactor core gets and the fuel rods, and they change the temperature of the fuel rods by changing the concentration of heavy water around it so they determine the amount of neutrons. That's how the Canadian reactors work. They don't make high-grade uranium. They make more slow neutrons. So what is happening in TEPCO is literally the ground is becoming like a CANDU Canadian reactor. Now, the danger is there's nobody controlling this reaction. So if it superheats, it's going to blow, which means you could have little burps or you could have a great big explosion. My guess is somewhere down the road, it could be months or a few years, you're going to have hydrogen explosions, probably more than one over centuries or millennia, and you're probably going to have nuclear explosions. And that means maybe a 2 kiloton, maybe a 20 kiloton, which is bigger than Hiroshima, will occur somewhere between, say, maybe 50, 100 meters below ground, blow a giant crater, and throw all those radioisotopes, materials, and fuel rods. A lot of it, because it's superheated with the nuclear explosion, will become pyrophoric, which means 60 to 80, 90% of it will turn into atomic particles and nanoparticles that'll be ejected really high into the atmosphere and circulate the planet 8 times before it descends. And some of it will be suspended in the upper atmosphere for centuries. So, for example, after the explosions of the atomic testing in Nevada test area and the Russian testing and the nuclear war and the nuclear attack on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, there are still radioactive isotopes suspended in the higher troposphere since the Second World War. So in other words, these are going to be injected in the atmosphere, and they're not just going to stay there. They're going to affect the entire planet.
Right.
So basically, we're having bioaccumulation, and the longer-acting isotopes will bioaccumulate faster. Shorter-acting ones will kind of reach a certain level, and they won't rise quite as fast because they don't stay around. Like, for example, 4 half-lives of iodine is gone in a month. But 4 half-lives of strontium and cesium-137, strontium-90 and cesium-137, stays around a few hundred years, so that level will keep on rising as long as there's something feeding it. And the levels of radioactive plutonium and other heavy isotopes that are very bad because they generate very high energy gamma rays, they're going to continue rising like a rocket.
Wow. Well, a rocket is a pretty good analogy to think about.
Yeah, it's really scary.
Yeah.
And what happens is we're hearing, it's unlikely that we'll have a zirconite fire. That's the least of our worries. The biggest problem is if it hits ground level, it makes the site unreasonable to treat or go in there. And conventional robots, they're not radiation proof like deep space robots or robots on cables, cannot operate there. And human beings, even suicidal ones, can't go in. So they're taking people in from Thailand, giving them multiple visas to go in, sending them back home, and when they show that they're starting to develop signs of illness, they send them home to die. Or the Yakuza are sending people in to pay off their debt at Fukushima.
Very well said. All right, hold on a sec. We'll come right back with Bill. I want to go over this idea of steel degrading again when we continue with Bill Deagle. The neutron flux is such that it actually atomically begins to weaken it. Back in a minute. Okay, back with Bill. Now, the idea of spent fuel pool number 4, we've talked about it many, many times. You understand it's up there about 100 feet off the ground. It is leaning. The whole building is listing. It is said now that the building has a 0 chance of withstanding a 6.5 earthquake, and we're getting close to that in the area. It could be any time now. That means the building falls down. All right, so tell us about how steel degrades. It's already been shaken and shaken again by all these earthquakes. But
if you did it was called X-ray crystallography of the steel, and of course you can X-ray the welds and you can see micro cracks. The newer types of X-ray mobile X-ray machines can look around welds or structural integrity of the building. What you'd see is it would almost look like the steel would look like glass that's been hit by a hammer, and you would see fault lines like micro cracks all through it. Those microcracks would be along the directional lines where the neutrons actually change the crystal structure, and you literally get micro breaks where it's almost like if you take a glass out of a dishwasher and it's too hot and you stick it in the freezer and there's a micro crack, it'll break right along the micro crack. So a very small shear force. And what happens with an earthquake is a whole range of frequencies. And that's why when one building falls, it has the frequencies that are in the earthquake. Most people think an earthquake is just a shoving motion up and down. No, it's a whole range of frequencies, all from a couple of hertz up to thousands of hertz. And if the building doesn't have frequency harmonics in the structural integrity of the building that's the same as the earthquake, it won't fall. And so that's why, for example, the earthquake device that Tesla had in this pocket that he could attach to the building, it picked up what's called a frequency harmonic of the building and amplified that. It's like the old story of what marching someone across. Now, what it does in steel is when the neutrons hit, it changes the crystal structure, and it creates some, in a sense, a cracks from minor fault lines across the metal. So that's very significant. Now, what's happening, of course, how this ties in, it may tie in the third hour with your third hour guest, which I'm sure, is the Japanese are probably the most apocalyptic people on Earth, and they've had writings going back for thousands of years that Japan will be swallowed by the dragon. Of course, the trench near Japan is the deepest trench on Earth. It's something like 8.5 miles deep. It's crazy how deep it is.
That's ridiculous. Yeah,
it is ridiculously deep, and it's like going into the deepest reaches of space. We don't have anything that can even go down and tolerate that kind of pressure. Even a robotic vehicle, we can go down a good ways, but not to the bottom of that trench. Now, what does that all mean? Well, the Japanese know they're an earthquake central. They should never have built any reactors there. And what's really going on right now, the question isn't so much what caused it, because I hear a lot of people that basically I think are crazy when they say they use a HARP weapon. Well, a HARP weapon would have, firstly, a signature that you'd pick up from ham radio operators. And if the HARP happened, you'd have ham radio operators all over the world, including whistleblowers, who would be telling us we had a HARP signal. Secondly, there's a public report, because everywhere you go, the HARP signal is so strong, it's hundreds of thousands of kilowatts. You'd see it, okay? Secondly, what happens is you don't just have a HARP signal that shoots up in the atmosphere. The geotectonic weapons that I know about are actually what's called tunable, and they don't go up into the atmosphere. They go into the Earth. They don't transmit it out to space. What they've discovered, like wind chimes, is every tectonic plate has what's called a harmonic frequency spectra. In other words, there's a spectral frequency that when you hit that frequency, that tectonic plate, and the surfaces reach what's called, there's a drop in mu, or the resistance between the rock faces. And the piezoelectric crystals in the rock face start to build up a harmonic vibration based on that spectra of frequency that's tuned to that particular plate. And over a period of hours or days, it builds up enough energy that the mu, or resistance on the rock face, drops towards zero, and the recoil in the rock surfaces allows a slip, whether it's a big slip or a little slip. And the weapons, by the way, are not HAARP. They're not shooting out into space. They're shooting into the Earth. So when people say it's HAARP, it's HAARP, it's HAARP, first off, they need to start harping on these things when they don't understand them. Number two, Japan, since March 11th, has had 500% more earthquakes, including, I think, in the last day or so, 2 more level 5 earthquakes. A level 6 will cause this cooling pool to fall over. It may be sooner because structural integrity is going. And it's not just that. They're having signs. If you look at volcanism and earthquake activity, it's all around Mount Fuji, which means if Mount Fuji blows as a volcano and we have earthquakes triggered around it, we're not just dealing with Fukushima Daiichi, Daini, and other plants, including one on the opposite side of Honshu that actually lost 400 tons of water, will lose containment. And we know that reactor number 1 was actually, the reactor containment was destroyed by the earthquake long before the tsunami struck. So people try to blame it on the tsunami. No, these plants were not designed to withstand these kind of tectonic forces, especially if the harmonics in the plant. And the thing is, they could actually probably test it with the known technology we have. We could probably ping the tectonic plates and find out if the harmonic frequencies would match specific frequencies. It's like an opera singer that tunes their voice so they can create specific subharmonics so they can make a glass start to sing and eventually shatter. So I know how you could actually do that, and I could, if there's any scientists out there want to know about my theories, I also think we could do the same thing atomically. We can actually, like Nikola Tesla said to Madame Curie over 80 years ago, we can take atomic elements that are radioactive and hang them with harmonic frequencies based in the periodic table, shatter off the radioactive portion of the element, and change the half-life. So we can't decontaminate with zeolite. You can't decontaminate by putting a sarcophagus, which makes a bigger problem. What you can do is you can try to filter out the air and control it, and you can make nanoparticles of boron, which grab the neutrons, which is one of the key things we got to do, because we got to stop worrying about a fire. We should put our deep space robots, which we do have, because there's deep space projects going on right now, that our regular space program, they don't want the public to know. And if you want to know a little bit about those deep space programs that I know that are far more advanced than people can imagine, I'll tell you about them when we come back.
Very good. On cue. And the music says we'll pause here at the bottom of the hour and continue in just a couple minutes. With Dr. Bill Deagle. Okay, Bill, go ahead. And by the way, we have new stories about Japan, and they're now openly talking about if spent fuel pool falls, the entire country might have to be evacuated. That's the kind of thing they're beginning to discuss now. Where would those people go?
Well, first off, what may be happening, too, is kind of a little bit of disinformation. You wouldn't have necessarily an immediate, you would call hydrogen or nuclear explosion until the corium gets underground, which it's already doing, and we may be having literally venting literally kilometers away from Fukushima into the ocean or into somewhere in Honshu, including into the tunnels that they're detecting radiation that are putting up on YouTube in Tokyo. So a lot of the radiation may be deep underground and venting out in the ocean or all the way many, many kilometers away from the site. So what happens if it falls over and something doesn't happen immediately? Some people are going to kind of go back to sleep and say, oh, look, you guys are just, and again, crying wolf again, and nothing happened. But in fact, this is worse in many ways than a zirconite fire, because a zirconite fire is just going to burn a bunch of it, and it'll vaporize, and you won't have necessarily a great big explosion that injects it high into the atmosphere. So it'll be a local radiation hazard rather than one that's going to go kaboom and blow it all over the place like a nuclear explosion, which is likely to happen if it gets underground months or years from now. One of the things I want to mention before I make some comments about Mr. Jaczko. Basically, I got the report from my nuclear expert, who goes by the name on Thursdays, Chris Harris, that he has inside information that the Obama administration and the nuclear administration that launched a number of new reactors, the first in 30 years, Southern Company and Scanacorp, were directly tapped by Obama to pull him, not because he was, quote, being tough on some of the women on the panel, which is a red herring. It's just that he was the first to demand safety first, and was not going to allow the reactivation of the Southern California San Onofre reactor, where they know there's a structural problem. And I talked to our nuclear safety engineer, and we know that the plate in which they weld these tubes, and they call it like for like. They put a lot more tubes than they were actually originally designed, and they would have gone back to get reapprovals on the structural design. They added many hundreds, 3,000s of more tubes, and the actual underlying structural design is defective, which means they're all going to vent off and have been venting off radioisotopes for decades. And the station blackout sped that process of burning out these tubes that they use for the steam turbine. And they know it. They know they first said there are only a few hundred tubes, now there's 1,500. And they really don't care.
1,500.
Yeah, Southern California Edison doesn't care if they kill 20 million Americans in Orange County, Riverside County, and San Diego County.
Right.
And I'm 12 miles from it. And believe me, I am very pissed that they would even consider reactivating this damn reactor, because they had a 3.9 earthquake there, and they sent just into upthrust zone only 4.5 miles offshore from this reactor. They discovered this 13 and 14 years ago, and they are asking the public to recertify the plant, which shouldn't be recertified. They should change it to natural gas to get the radioisotopes the hell out of there. Excuse my English. Because, just like other plants like Diablo Canyon, and 75% of the reactors they admit release tritium at the very least, but none of these reactors, all 75 plus of the 104 in America, are within a strike zone of a major quake.
Yep.
This is beyond stupid. This is what I call it on purpose. Now, I want to explain, and your third-hour guest will bring it up, because what's going on is a ceremony. Now, we have the burning of care going to start in Bohemian Grove, but what's going on now is a global ceremony that goes back to ancient Atlantis. It was reproduced in ancient Sumer and passed on to the Egyptians. The ancient Sumerian name for this is called the ceremony of Pahanuk. And the same ceremony is reproduced in other parts of the world, whether it's Japan or in Central America. And the signs are things like this ring eclipse we recently just had, where the sun is swallowed up and then the sun is victorious. Oftentimes these alignments, by the way, can trigger off earthquakes, but what really is going on is they are promoting the burning of civilization, because they believe civilization will rise from the ashes and be a new reborn phoenix bird. Basically, it's the ceremony of the phoenix. And there's a disaster of not only putting their reactors there, but the removal of Mr. Jaczko, who was actually the first one and the only one that had guts to actually talk for safety issues. And I talked to my contact, Chris Harris, tonight before the show. And he told me all of his 40 friends, they're actually the main consultants that are specially contracted for all the reactors in America and the NRC, all said that Jaczko is the only one who's actually doing his job in years. So all this hoo-ha that that they're going to try to replace him is that they want to reactivate reactors. They're not going to do anything to increase safety, because these earthquakes are not just increasing in Japan, they're increasing all over the planet. In volcanoes like Mount Etna, Mount Vesuvius in Italy, earthquakes and volcanoes shooting off the top of a mountain in Iran. We're seeing the Mount Fuji actually getting activated. We're seeing activity everywhere. And what's going on is there is a change in what's called a curvature of time-space. It's called a vortex. or the fifth dimensional time-space, which special relativity talks about. And as we pass through the galactic plane, which occurs every 62 million years, and we're in the process of passing through it, which takes 30 years, we're going to hit the midpoint in December. And it's not like an event happened in December, but after that, it's like making a very, very rapid hairpin turn at 300 miles an hour on a icy mountain road.
Uh-huh.
Even if you've got studs, you might have a problem in 7,000 feet you're airborne.
I would think.
And what that does, it also not only curves time spaces, it changes the movement of plasma inside stars, and it changes things that are very likely to be what I call the kill shot, because we know, and I know from my very secure classified contacts, they don't expect this class 3 red star dwarf star to pass through the planet Jupiter and
now what?
Mars.
All right, describe a dwarf star. What is it? What's it going to do?
A dwarf star is a star that has not ignited the full ignition, so you don't have like a giant gas ball where you got plasma and you got literally the starlight that we see from the sun that's emerging on the surface is actually created. Some of those photons of energy are created 100,000 years ago and take that long to emerge all the way through the layers of the sun to get to the surface and radiate us. It's a giant, not only, it's a fusion reactor, in other words. It's actually creating not only fission, but fusion. So the sun is actually a fusion reactor. That's why when Michio Kaku talks about different levels of energy, a level 0 civilization is like our civilization, which is 0, where we've discovered fire. We can burn sticks. We can burn petroleum. Level 1 civilization can control fusion energy, which you call star energy.
Mm-hmm.
Level 2 can control a black hole in the center of the galaxy, control galactic energy.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not there yet, but
no.
Things that they're going to happen, and they know these superquakes are going to hit, and our reactors are sitting like little pins on the edge of a fence ready to be shot down by target practice.
It's ridiculous,
and
I know.
Removal of JASCO is what I call, beyond stupidity, it is a ceremonial procedure to burn Earth.
Burnt offerings, the biggest one of all.
The burnt offering, yep. It's the ancient ceremony of the Phoenix, or Ha-Hanuk.
Sounds right. All right, hold on. Be right back. Okay, I'm back with Dr. Bill. All right, William, go right ahead.
Yeah, I think that what I talk about on my show is the Nutra-Medical Report. And I've been preparing for years because I've known the dangers of radiation. I was a member of ACOM, the nuclear division of the American College for Occupational Environmental Medicine. 40 years ago, I was supposed to go to nuclear physics at MIT, actually 43 years ago, and I went into honors biochemistry. I had a special scholarship arranged. I decided to not. I went into honors biochemistry. I did my PhD research project in 5 months at age 21. I was ready to write the thesis, and my grandfather was dying of diabetes, so I went into research of diabetes. And I can tell you what we're going to see happen from radiation is very different than what people expect. Yes, I know I've re-looked at the report from Mr. Gunderson. The chances of a pyrophoric fire are possible, but I don't think it's the highest likelihood. The highest likelihood is what I call the quiet salting of radiation from massive bursts of radiation, where we're getting no reporting from Japan, no reporting from the United Nations, no reporting from the CDC or the Atomic Energy Commission, no reporting, I call the Center for Disease Creation, and there are useless agencies here, and even the University of California, Berkeley won't even return my calls. One of the few places that was doing some testing. And of course, the levels that they're actually reporting, and even the standards they were using, were incorrect. They just moved the standards and say, look, it's no longer radioactive. You just changed the standards, like in Canada, where they try to pretend they're all so good and they want to make sure your wild salmon isn't radioactive. Now, people need to understand the solution to pollution is not dilution. What's going to happen is these radioisotopes will gradually, and not so gradually, bioaccumulate. And they'll accumulate at the pace. We are like these airline pilots and stewards flying through radiation clouds up at the Alaska Airlines.
Don't worry about it. It's just the dry cleaners of the uniforms.
Not a dry cleaning issue. I've looked into what happened there, and I can tell you, hundreds of people having the same effect.
Yeah.
What we're seeing is probably increasingly radioactive aircraft where no one's walked in there.
No one's doing it. Bill, excuse me. In the beginning, in late March of last year, they were testing airliners that were landing here, coming from Japan. 2 of them landed in, I think it was Dallas-Fort Worth, and another 1 or 2 in Chicago.
Yeah, even luggage coming in, right?
They were the exterior skin of the plane, the interior
right, even
air
luggage
of the plane.
coming into the detector.
That's
they
right.
Walk in
That's
to the baggage area and say, "Oh my gosh, you got a radioactive bag there."
That's right.
Go on home, take your cab. Here you go.
That's right.
So
and they haven't checked any aircraft since then, to my knowledge, that they have talked about in public.
Now, the report I have is from one of my contacts, was just a matter of a month ago, and he said when he flew through the air over Washington State, that his Inspector Plus went up to something like 1,400 counts per minute from background.
In the plane.
In the plane.
Now that means that we're drawing in the air from the outside, and if you're talking 1,300 to 1,400 CPM inside the plane, and you got to remember normal background is about 30 to 35, and you're talking 1,400.
He might be skeptical. I'm not sure the exact number, but it was well over 1,000. And he thought I might be skeptical, so he sent me a photograph done with his smartphone and emailed it to me of his taking a picture of Inspector Plus taking the reading inside the aircraft.
Wow.
In the air.
Wow.
Now, what people have to understand is these plumes can be quite coherent. In other words, you can have a plume that's at 30,000 feet, and it can go all the way to Azerbaijan, if you want to call it, or it can go to the Czech Republic. It doesn't have to necessarily, oh, you poor people in California or Washington State, Oregon. No.
Right.
It can go way over our heads and keep on going. It can drop in Panama. It can take right turns and get into these upper airstream, what's called these giant rivers of air that carry more water, each one of these major rivers.
Than the Amazon River.
Than the Amazon River by 100 times or more every day. And the thing is, people say, oh, we're fine. No, they've already detected radiation that has burst down to the across the equator. And what happens is when these nanoparticles get inserted, and one of the ways we test it is we have what's called battleship steel. Have you ever heard the story before?
No.
In order to detect radiation, if they're going to detect it from a person that's been exposed, there's a few facilities like the one at the University of Utah where they have battleship steel, and they have it sequestered, the U.S. military, in special warehouses so they can't get contaminated, because all steel, all metal, all food in the world is now contaminated to the point where you can't make a metal detector except out of pre-Nagasaki and Hiroshima and Bikini Atoll nuclear testing before they drop the bomb.
Exactly.
And if you don't have that battleship steel, guess what? You can't make a proper detector to determine if the person's radioactive. You got to put them inside a chamber with pre-Second World War, battleship steel, and actually make that chamber out of this battleship steel so you're not irradiating the person, because everything on Earth is radioactive. And these isotopes are still dropping, cesium, strontium, plutonium, etc., from the explosions, the Nevada test sites in the 60s and 50s, and right back to Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And people say, that's ridiculous. I said, no, those particles are going to stay up there for centuries or millennia. They're not going down easy. And when they do come down, they come down to Earth in rain. They come down, and they do funny things, too, just like the mercury, like Minamata disease. People say, well, how did the mercury get up and affect the fish up in the north and affect the polar bears? Well, one of the things that's happening is these radioisotopes are speeding up the degradation of the ozone layer. So whether it's in the southern hemisphere down in New Zealand or southern tip of South America where the animals are going blind, part of the reason why is the xenon-133 and radioiodine-131 catalyze a chemical reaction that destroys the ozone layer at an enormous pace. So if you get a massive burp of radioiodine and these other isotopes, you could have the ozone layer just go poof for a matter of days, weeks, or even months. And which means if you go outside, you're going to go blind and you'll get second or third degree burns in a matter of minutes. And all the crops and all the trees and all the grassy plants will be immediately literally wiped. In other words, you walk out and you say, oh, how come the plants aren't growing? Oh, they're all turning white. They died.
Right.
And how about we don't hear birds chirping anymore, or bees flittering around, because if they were outside when this radiation event happened and the ozone layer decided to go, all of your crops are going to go poof. So if people don't have emergency food, I'm not going to say God help you, because he told me and told many others like yourself to witness, to tell people, this is not a joke, and it's not Mayan prophecies. It could happen after 2012, but we're in a time period where even if we could do something, which we could do things, I'm certain. We have science and technology, bright people. They don't want to, because it's ceremonially the time that they believe that they're going to do this to the planet and to, quote, the profane, because it's time to have a massive human sacrifice and call her humanity.
Right. Exactly.
People say, oh, how do you carry it from the science to this? I said, it's all science. It's spiritual science. It's astrological science. It's the science of time cycles, which the ancient Mayans understood. We can parse the second down to femtoseconds, yet we don't understand that time and even space has structure and has cyclic patterns, which they understood. They even saw when they saw a comet coming by, oh, that's not good. Because they knew that when the comet went by, like Halley's Comet, if it passed close enough to Earth, the tail of the comet had a neurotoxin that could kill animals. Did you know that?
Now, is this true?
Yes.
You're
in fact,
sure?
We know the kind of chemicals are in the tail. That's why when you get these weird sulfury smells and so on, it turns out that the chemicals are very, very similar to nerve gas, which causes a neurotoxic paralysis and suffocation in the tail of comets. Interesting, eh?
All right. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, so the observations by these ancient people, they were not stupid. They just didn't have a lot of our technology, except in the really ancient times before they blew it, because they were doing all kinds of things, like putting up the Dark Knight satellite out at 22,000 miles in polar orbit 12 to 25 to 35,000 years ago. So our civilization has risen and fallen numerous times before. Human beings have been around here a long time, and we've screwed up major. And
every time.
and by the way, those people who think somehow we're going to be rescued by the quote aliens, get a life. Yeah. Get a life, okay? Right now we're under what I call supernatural judgment. They're just standing back like I'm watching called the galactic special called Earth Apocalypse Now.
True.
And they're all tuned in all over the galaxy. Do you see the latest edition? No. They're not doing anything about Fukushima. They're even ignoring the stories. They're even trying to spin it that Greg Jasko was he was harassing women. We have to remove this guy. He wanted better safety rules. He didn't want them to kill 20 million Southern California.
Oh, please.
What a guy. And what a party pooper. I mean, when you're ready to kill millions of people, you got a guy wanting to follow the rules. What's going on?
He's gone.
He's gone.
Get him out of there.
That kind of, when you see get him out of there, man. And you can know that Obama, I call him Obama Nokia, you can be sure they tapped him on the shoulder. Not going to get reelected this way, guy. Look at General Electric. They gave $2 billion to his campaign, not only for computers, but also General Electric is behind the Mark I reactors. They're tapping him on the shoulder, $2 billion for healthcare computers for all the doctors to make sure that your doctor now becomes a white-coated spitznot. So everything you say, like the song Sting, every move you make, every breath you take, or every respiration, ronchi, and rowl of your lungs will record it for posterity in a digital database that the Health and Human Services will determine whether you should live or die. People say, oh, I can tell you, they'll be just dying for, if not Obamacare, they'll try to resurrect it in pieces and call it the new plan. They're not even as sneaky as the Nazis. These guys are just bold. They're saying, you know what? This will kill you, but you're going to have national health care.
What a world.
All of this happening at the same time, and there's no need for it. We have solutions for everything.
Of course we do.
I talk about it every day on my show. You do it on your show. Every single issue we have, there are solutions. The reason why it's not happening is because we're ruled by people who are of clay and iron that are not human.
No, sir, they are not. Nope.
They're not human.
They don't. They won't. That's just the way it's going to be.
They have a physical body, I call the husk, and they are avatared by entities that are not of this world.
Well said, my friend. Thank you very much.
Take care, everybody. If you don't believe it, do two things. Use your intellect, check out the references, find out yourself, and then pray. And when it smacks you in the side of the head of the truth, then do something, even a little bit, even just waking up the person beside you. Because we can move this giant boulder like Sisyphus, pushing the boulder up the hill, and we'll roll back if enough of us decide that it's worth doing.
It's possible.
It
is possible. Thank you, Bill.